Assalamu alaikum, good day. Today we'll be talking about the biology of survival and how a bacterial population trend can help us understand human population trends. Today we are going to explore the fascinating world of bacteria and the deep lessons they can teach us about survival, growth, and even human society. We'll dive into an experiment studying the bacteria Cytophaga Johnsonae, and we'll find out how these tiny organisms responded to seemingly perfect conditions. You might be surprised by what we learn. This experiment, conducted by researchers in the field of microbiology, the reference of the paper is given in the description, mirrors some of the challenges that we as humans face in society. It's a journey from bacterial cultures in a laboratory to the dynamics of population growth, social conditions, and the reasons why we behave the way we do. Now I'll tell you about the experiment and what happened to Cytophaga johnsoni. Imagine a world where everything is perfect. The temperature is ideal, food is plentiful, waste is removed on time, and there is no outside interference. This is exactly the kind of environment the scientists created for Cytophaga johnsoni, a bacteria commonly found in soil and water. They used a machine called a chemostat, which creates controlled, steady conditions for growing bacteria. In this system, bacteria are constantly fed nutrients and waste is continuously removed. It's a bit like putting bacteria on life support, an endless buffet with no environmental stressors to contend with. But even though everything was ideal, something curious happened. Over time, the bacteria's ability to reproduce dropped. Initially, they were growing, thriving, and reproducing, but eventually, only 20% of the bacteria were able to reproduce, and most of them were simply surviving, not thriving. Why did this happen? The researchers found that despite the perfect conditions, the bacteria faced something deeper, internal stress. Even without external threats like starvation or pollution, the bacteria were experiencing internal damage, the biological equivalent of rust in an old car engine. The bacteria were not running out of food. They were not being poisoned. They were just slowing down. The cost of reproduction became too high for the bacteria. Instead of constantly producing more offspring, they focused on just staying alive, adapting to their environment. In a sense, the bacteria shifted from a state of growth to a state of maintenance. So, why did this happen? This is where the story gets really interesting. The first thing to understand is that the bacteria didn't stop growing because they were facing a lack of resources. They had everything they needed: food, space, ideal living conditions. So, why would they slow down their reproduction? The scientists concluded that internal stress was building up over time. When conditions are perfect, organisms do not have to expend energy on survival. But what about reproduction? Reproduction is energetically expensive. It takes a lot of resources to grow and maintain offspring, which in turn uses up energy that could be spent on survival. So, over time, some bacteria adapted by mutating, focusing less on reproduction and more on survival. These mutations help them survive in an unchanging, perfect environment. Reproduction, in their biological sense, became less of a priority. This can be thought of like a person in a safe, stable environment. They may start focusing on hobbies, comfort, or other personal interests rather than thinking about starting a family. It's not because they don't have the resources or the capacity, but because their internal priorities shift over time. So, what does this tell us about human societies? Now, let's bring this back to humans. We live in a world that is increasingly safe, with improved healthcare, access to food, and technologies that reduce many of the hardships our ancestors faced. And yet, we see something fascinating. In wealthier, more developed nations, birth rates have been dropping over time. This mirrors the bacterial phenomena. Just like the bacteria in the chemostat, when people live in relatively perfect conditions with ample resources and no immediate threats, reproduction becomes less of a priority. People might begin to focus on personal growth, careers, or even environmental concerns rather than having large families. In the context of developed nations, such as in Europe, the US, or parts of East Asia, we are seeing a phenomena where people are waiting longer to have children. Some choose not to have children at all. The focus has shifted from growth to stability and personal satisfaction. This shift is subtle, but it is real. When you provide people with comfort, healthcare, and security, the urgency for procreation decreases. In many ways, this mirrors the behavior of the bacteria in the chemostat, living comfortably but not necessarily multiplying. Contrast with poorer countries. Now, the stark contrast in poorer countries, particularly those in parts of South Asia, Africa, and Latin America, birth rates are still high. Families tend to have more children despite the challenges they face: poverty, poor healthcare, lack of resources, and social instability. Why is this? Let's break it down. First, unstable conditions. In many developing countries, the environment is less predictable. Health crisis, food insecurity, and the need for manual labor force families to reproduce more, hoping that a few children will survive to adulthood. It's not a comfortable environment like the chemostat. It's more akin to a system in constant flux. Economic factors. In many poor country areas, children are seen as economic assets. They contribute to household work, help in the fields, or support the family in various ways. As a result, the incentive to have more children is tied to the economic reality of survival. This mirrors the old ways of thinking that more children equal more hands to help. And then there are social and cultural factors. In societies where traditional family structures still hold strong, children are seen as blessings, and there is often little to no access to family planning or reproductive health resources. Here, the decision to have many children is tied to faith, culture, and the desire for a large family legacy. And then lack of education and healthcare. In countries where healthcare systems are poor, access to birth control is limited and education about family planning is scarce. Families are more likely to have more children. This is the opposite of the chemostat model, where lack of stress leads to reduced reproduction, because here external stress and insecurity push families to reproduce more. Let's draw some parallels here. In wealthy societies, as people's basic needs are met and life becomes more predictable, they tend to prioritize things like careers, personal development, or simply enjoying the freedom from survival stress. Reproduction becomes less urgent, much like the bacteria in the chemostat, who shift their focus from reproduction to survival. But in poorer countries, where basic needs are not met, survival is the primary goal. In these environments, reproduction becomes a form of risk management, a way to ensure that at least some children survive and contribute to the family and community. The environment itself demands high reproduction, much like the bacteria in harsh conditions, where more offspring are needed to ensure survival. The big insight from the chemostat experiment is that even in perfect, stable conditions, growth can slow down. The drive to reproduce diminishes as survival becomes the primary concern. This can be a paradox of stability. When conditions are too perfect, growth and reproduction are not seen as necessary. This insight applies not only to bacteria but also to human societies. In stable, secure environments, reproduction slows down and people focus on other forms of growth, whether it's career, personal development, or leisure. However, in environments where instability reigns, reproduction becomes a necessary priority for survival. So, what can we learn from Cytophaga Johnsonae and its behavior in the chemostat? In essence, both bacteria and humans adapt to their environments, sometimes in ways we don't expect. For bacteria, even perfect conditions can eventually lead to stagnation. For humans, the opposite can happen. Difficult conditions push for more children, more survival strategies, more hope in the face of instability. As we look at the world today, we see this paradox playing out. In wealthy nations, people are choosing to have fewer children, while in poorer countries, families continue to grow in the face of hardship. The key takeaway here is that stability can sometimes stifle growth, while hardship can push us to survive and thrive in ways we may not always understand. As we move forward, it's crucial to consider how we can offer more than just stability. How can we create environments where people, regardless of where they live, feel empowered not just to survive, but to flourish? We often think of ourselves as independent decision makers, conscious, logical, deliberate. But when it comes to things like starting families, choosing to have children, or even the way we value aging and productivity, we are more like that chemostat culture than we'd like to admit. There's a strange irony. We may not be living in a literal lab flask, but we are inside economic, social, and ideological containers. And those containers shape us just as powerfully as the temperature, nutrients, and waste removal systems shape the lives of Cytophaga johnsoni. So, why do people in resource poor countries still tend to have larger families? Well, it's not simply cultural or traditional. It's because in unpredictable or unstable environments, reproduction becomes a kind of biological insurance. In places where healthcare is poor, social security is absent, and jobs are insecure. Having more children increases the odds that someone will survive, someone will provide, someone will carry the family forward. In contrast, when people live in stable, resourced environments, birth rates tend to decline, even without government policy. The bacteria in the chemostat stopped reproducing not because they were dying, but because reproduction simply became less essential for survival in their new normal. This mirrors a profound trend in human societies. Fertility drops with stability, and yet we rarely notice that we are part of it. Think about it. How often do we choose careers over children or delay parenting until conditions feel right? How often do families say we can't afford another child, not in the literal sense of poverty, but in terms of time, energy, and ambition? We think we are making individual choices, but we are following a trend, a population logic, just like bacterial colonies shift behavior under stable or stressful conditions. So, theologists call this the demographic transition, a predictable shift from high birth and death rates to low birth and death rates as societies modernize. But beyond economics and healthcare, there is something deeper, a cultural evolution. When survival no longer requires reproduction, meaning starts to replace multiplication. People want purpose, not just progeny. We begin to seek legacy through ideas, impact, or expression, rather than through children alone. So here's the key message. Whether it's bacteria in a chemostat or families in South Asia or women in urban Europe delaying motherhood, we are never fully separate from the systems we live in. Our bodies, our minds, our families, they're all shaped by our environments. And if we want to change what we pass on to the next generation, we don't just need to change our minds, we need to change the systems. A poor and scared person has more children. Let's pause and think about one simple truth. Fear creates patterns, and one of the oldest human responses to fear is reproduction. More specifically, reproducing more, having more children, becomes a survival strategy when the future feels unsafe. A poor person doesn't have retirement funds. They don't have a government safety net, pensions, or reliable health insurance. They don't know who will take care of them when they're old, sick, or alone. So, what do? They have more children, not because they want to play with grandkids on the weekends or post cute pictures on social media. They do it out of need, out of fear, and out of cultural memory, the kind that's been shaped for generations by poverty, war, famine, and abandonment. In many poor communities, especially in South Asia and parts of Africa and the Arab world, children aren't just family, they are a form of insurance. They are the backup plan. If one child dies, a very real fear, another might live. If one child gets married and moves away, maybe another will stay. If a daughter is married off to another family, perhaps a son will take care of the parents. This is not selfishness, it's not ignorance, it's survival. And let's not forget the rich and stable countries that now advocate for two is enough once did exactly the same thing. A century ago, in Europe and America, large families were the norm, not out of romance, but out of the same anxiety and lack of institutional support. The only thing that changed security. Healthcare systems got better, pensions were introduced, education became widespread, women joined the workforce, people no longer needed five kids to survive, so they stopped having five kids. So, before we judge why some poor communities continue to have large families, we must ask, have we given them the safety nets that make fewer children a viable option? Until then, their choices aren't irrational. They are perfectly logical within the system they are trapped in. For the poor, children are not a burden, they are a blessing. People often ask, why do the poor have so many children? And most answers focus only on economics or lack of education. But the truth runs much deeper. It is emotional, it is human. When someone spends their entire day in hard labor, sweating in the sun, worrying about tomorrow's meal, facing humiliation and uncertainty, they are not just trying to earn money, they are trying to hold on to meaning. In that kind of life, children aren't an extra mouth to feed. They are the heart of the home. They bring smiles to tired faces, hope to empty rooms, and most importantly, they give the poor a reason to wake up and keep going. To them, children are dreams. This one will do what I couldn't. He will lift our name. She will grow into something I never got to become. But above all, these children offer pure, simple joy in a world that gives so little back. In a society where respect must be bought, a child hugs you without condition. Where people are judged by status, a child sees only love. This isn't just a survival instinct, it's emotional survival, it's human resilience. So, when someone poor has many children, they are not always being irresponsible or unaware. Sometimes they are simply trying to fill the silence of struggle with the sound of life. In a world that offers them no security, they create their own form of hope. Have a nice day. Make life easy for others.